It was about 4 weeks ago, I think, the last time I stood and filled in for Wade, but it was, and we looked at the text of Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. We stated that these verses were the introduction to the great sermon that Jesus gave to the multitudes as they followed him into the mountain. And this great sermon, this is the greatest sermon, of course, the world has ever heard from the greatest teacher that the world has ever witnessed. And it was recorded for us to read and to study by inspiration in Matthew's chapter 5, verse and 6 and 7. And it's declared at the end of chapter 7, in chapter 7, verse 29, it says, "He taught as one having authority, and not as the scribes." And he taught not as a teacher with delegated authority, but as one who had authority by the divine right of his own one person, that being the Son of God. The 8 declarations which introduce this glorious sermon have been named the Beattitudes. And they describe the realm of the kingdom of heaven as a state of spiritual blessedness, which produces the highest happiness of the soul. And in the first lesson, we defined the word blessed as to pronounce happy, and that's according to W. Vine's Dictionary of New Testament Words. And our text, again, is Matthew chapter 5, 1 through 12. And let's go ahead and read that again, because if you haven't read it since we read it, it's been a month, so it's time to read it again. "And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain, and when he was set, his disciples came unto him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you." Our text verse for this evening, I'm not going to try to cover all these in one time. In fact, my plan is just cover them one at a time. And if I'm asked to substitute again, then I'll go to the next one. This is what I plan to do in the future, in the next 10 years or so, as I fill in from time to time. We'll get through these 8 Beatitudes maybe. But anyway, that's my plan. But the text verse for this evening, I want us to look at Matthew 5, verse 4. "Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted." We said last lesson about a month ago that the poor in spirit of the first Beatitude were those who had a humble spirit. Happy are the humble-hearted who depend upon God for their salvation and their direction, who submit themselves to the will of God. Through obedience to the gospel of Jesus Christ, they will be guided into the kingdom of heaven. And the second Beatitude seems to be saying, happy are they that are unhappy. That doesn't sound exactly right, does it? Happy are they that are, for they shall be comforted. This Beatitude seems to be contradictory. It seems like it's a contradictory view that is prevalent in our. It not only contradicts itself seemingly, but it also contradicts the prevailing idea of our society. Few people would pronounce a blessing or happiness on those who are mourning, or those who affirm that they live in, or they would not affirm that they live in a blessed or truly blessed state of life if they're in a state of mourning. Many would say that you can't be happy at the same time that you're in mourning. It would be uncharacteristic in our society to claim happiness for someone who mourns. It's the philosophy of this world that happiness comes only from the good things in life. The pleasures in life, the fun part of life, and those things that entertain us and bring laughter or happiness to us. This is the only place that we can find happiness. This is where happiness comes from. The mourning that Jesus speaks of in this second beatitude is the sorrow which pierces the heart and expresses itself in audible cries and the shedding of tears. It's literally the mourning of someone with a broken heart. Someone that's heart has been broken, and they are indeed mourning and crying in the state of mourning. And if you want to know something about a person's character, find out what makes them laugh and what makes them mourn. When we laugh at, or what we laugh at, or what we weep over indicates the values of life. And so a little child may laugh over something that's very serious to an adult, not understanding the seriousness of the situation. There's a story that there was a large train wreck, a very tragic train wreck, and many people were killed and many people were hurt and maimed. And as the rescuers were going through the wreckage and finding people that needed to be rescued and needed to be helped, of course they were finding dead bodies. And they happened upon this woman who had been killed, but she had a small child that she had cradled in her bosom and protected when the wreck happened, and the child was unhurt. And of course, the rescuers reached down to get the child and to distract the child because of the situation. They got out their keys from their pocket. You know how you get your keys out to fascinate, how kids are fascinated. You get your keys out and, Well, that's what the rescuer did and gave the keys to the young child. And of course, the child took them. No problem. That was something good. They were able to pick the child up and take them out. And the child was playing with the keys. Well, after a while, it became time to take the child to a place of where they could take care of it. And so the child was all happy playing with keys, but the person that gave them the keys had to come get the keys. Well, when they took the keys away, the child began to cry. The child made the child unhappy. The child didn't weep over the death of its mother. It didn't understand. It had no comprehension of the seriousness of it. But you take away the keys and it started to cry. Mourning is a state of mind where we need to understand the seriousness of the situation. And sometimes we understand and sometimes we do not. But whenever we enter into the experience of mourning, then we need to understand what Jesus is talking about when he says, "Blessed are those who mourn." Also, whenever we enter into the experience of joy, we need to make ourselves we understand that we can be a candidate for sorrow or for mourning. Every situation that we find ourselves in that's joyful or happy can turn into a situation of mourning. Have you ever thought about that? Almost every joyful occasion that we enjoy in this life can flip in just a moment of time. Can change from a thing of joy to a thing of mourning. For example, a young couple gets married. What's more joyful than a wedding, right? What's more joyful than coming to a wedding and a young couple are dedicating themselves to each other for the rest of their lives. And this is a joyous experience. And it's joyful for everyone, well, maybe for the mothers and fathers of the bride and groom. It might not be quite, well, in some cases it might be pretty exciting, but sometimes we understand that there's some sorrow involved. But for the bride and the groom, it's the most joyful occasion up till that point in their life. But suppose one of them becomes ill with a terminal illness. Or suppose one of them becomes helplessly disabled because of an accident. Even though there are times of happiness, there becomes times of sorrow and sadness and times of mourning. Another example is a happy marriage, and from this happy marriage comes children. What's more blessed than having children born into a family and a relationship of people who have a good, joyous, loving family? Besides the marriage itself, there's nothing more joyous in most families than the occasion of a birth. But suppose one of the children develops a dreaded disease, a terminal illness, or is hurt, or dies in an accident. So we can see how some occasions, even though they're joyful, can turn into a time of mourning. But just about everything in life that brings joy can also bring sorrow. The situation can be turned into a situation of sorrow. And that's how life is. That's how life is. That's the way it is. In the 55th Psalm, one of the great Psalms of David, he recites the depth of pain that the heart knows in the disappointments and sorrows of life. And then he cries out, he says, "Oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest. Lo, then would I wander far off and remain in the wilderness. I would hasten my escape far from the windy storms and tempest." The 55th Psalm, verses 6 through 8. We all at one time or another have felt as David when we have faced sorrow, disappointment and discouragement. Oh, if we only had the wings to fly away, to get away from it all. Blessed are they that mourn. This beatitude sounds paradoxical. Happy are they that mourn. The whole structure of the man of this world is to avoid mourning, it's to avoid sorrow, and it's to avoid pain. Yet when we study the Bible, we learn it was a common thing for man to mourn. Just about every major character that we read about in the Bible had periods of mourning. There was periods of mourning. Abraham wept when Sarah died. David said in the 42nd Psalm, he said, "My soul thirsteth for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? My tears have been my meat day and night, while they continually say unto me, Where is thy God?" 42nd Psalm, verses 2 and 3. And Paul acknowledged Timothy's tears. Paul wrote to Timothy, he says, "I thank God to whom I serve from my forefathers with pure conscience, that without ceasing I have remembrance of thee in my prayers night and day, greatly desiring to see thee, being mindful of thy tears, that I may be filled with joy. 2 Timothy 1, 3, and 4. Timothy wept, and Paul was aware. Timothy wept because of discouragement. Paul's letter, one of the reasons for Paul's letter to Timothy was a letter of encouragement to him, because he knew that he was discouraged. He knew that Timothy had shed tears of sorrow because of discouragement. Jeremiah the prophet, who had been called by God to preach to Israel about a coming judgment, came and preached with tears. Jeremiah wrote, "Oh, that my head were water and mine eyes were of a fountain of tears, that I may weep night and day, and the slain of the daughter of my people." Jeremiah 9, verse 1. Paul also wrote about his own tears. Paul had periods of sorrow and tears. He says, "Therefore watch and remember that by the space of 3 years I cease not to warn you night and day with tears." Acts 20, verse 31. The psalmist David, he shed tears of loneliness. Timothy shed tears of discouragement. Jeremiah shed tears of disappointment. Paul shed tears of concern. Jesus says, "Blessed are they that mourn." The mourning of this beatitude springs from a sense of sin, from a tender consciousness, from a broken heart. It is godly sorrow over rebellion against God and hostility towards His will. Who's not guilty of that? We've all been guilty of that, have we not? We've all been guilty of rebelling against God. We've all been guilty of not only rebelling against God, but of being hostile towards His Word, and that we refuse. I'll pick that up in a minute. We'll refuse to do what He said. Sometimes we simply refuse to do what God said. That should bring about mourning. When we recognize, when we realize that's what we've done, that should break our heart. That should break our heart. This mourning is the agonizing realization that it was my sins that nailed the Lord of glory to the cross. When we acknowledge that and we understand that, then we will mourn over our sins. Blessed are they that mourn. It's such tears and groans that prepare the heart to receive the balm of Gilead. Our Lord never tried to escape the sorrows of life, nor did He deny that they existed. Jesus did not tell His disciples to go out and look for sorrow, but He didn't tell them that He was able to transform their tears or He said He would transfer their tears and bring them comfort. He said, in fact, He told them there's going to be challenges in your life. There's going to be problems in your life. There's going to be persecution in your life. But I can help you with that. Mourning and sorrow alone never made a better person. But sorrow and mourning plus Jesus Christ can make one spiritually stronger. If we are to experience the comforts that comes from mourning, we must recognize the fact that there's more than one kind. There are at least 3 kinds of mourning. If I can count 3. At least 3 kinds of mourning. First of all, there is the natural mourning, the natural sorrow that comes in life. And we've already spoken a little bit about that. But this kind of sorrow comes to everyone. It comes to those who are members of the Lord's church. It comes to those who are unsaved, those who are rich, those who are poor, those who are old, those who are young, those who are educated, those who are uneducated. Everyone experiences natural sorrow of some kind at some point, and some more than others. But it's there. It's just a part of life, as we said before. Nehemiah sat down and wept when he heard that the walls of Jerusalem had been broken down and the gates were burned. He had a time of mourning. It was a patriarchal, not patriarchal, but what's that word for patriot? He was a patriot. He had, his heart was in the city of Jerusalem. He was a patriotic concerning that city. And when he heard it was destroyed, the walls were torn down, the gates were burned up, it hurt him. Because he loved that city, because it had a special place. It was not only a special place for him personally, but it was special for his nation, for the nation of Israel. And it was a national pride kind of mourning that he had over the city. It was a natural thing. It's natural for us today to be patriotic and to have, have you ever seen a military parade and seen the flag pass by with these military people so sharp and so just impressive, and just a lump come in your throat? That's normal if you're patriotic. Paul must have shed many tears on leaving behind those that he had taught, those he had lived with and stayed with and become very familiar with and had a special relationship with in the churches that he established. Upon leaving these people for other fields, other places, don't you know that there was many tears shed on his departure, not only on his part, but those of those Christians whom he had been close to for the time he had been there? Natural. It's natural. Solomon said, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to weep, a time to laugh." Ecclesiastes 3 verses 1 through 4. Natural sorrow expressed in mourning releases a healing process normally in a person's life, and enables a person to accept the pain, to work through the pain, to work through this particular thing that has brought them sorrow, and adjust their life again that they might be happy again. Some people have the idea that weeping is a sign of weakness, and having this natural sorrow is a time of weakness, but that's not a time of weakness. Self-pity is a sign of weakness, but not natural mourning. The second type of mourning is that of unnatural mourning. It's unnatural because it affects our lives, and the effect on our lives is opposite to what God wants us to experience. Natural mourning heals, and unnatural mourning makes the wound deeper, makes the sorrow worse, and it fills the heart with pain. Unnatural sorrow isolates one from reality. And psychologists who have studied bereavement and grief tell us that unnatural mourning is brought about by many causes. One major cause is selfishness. A self-centered person who uses other people to make their own life sane and pleasant, and if they lose that person they've been using, it upsets their lifestyle, and it causes them pain and hurt and sorrow. But it's not because they lost someone, but it's because how it affects them. You've probably known people like that. Their mourning is more about themselves than about those who they've lost. Fear is another cause of unnatural mourning. It may be the fear of the future, or the fear of change, or perhaps even the fear of death itself. Excessive tears and mourning then becomes an invisible armor of protection, and the person for the person who is experiencing these hard knocks of life. They're saying, don't lay any responsibilities on me. Do not demand too much of me. Can't you see that I have enough problems? Can't you see that I've got enough to bear already? And sometimes unnatural grief is brought on by guilt. King David illustrates this unnatural mourning concerning his son that died, that was the son that was born by Bathsheba because of the adultery that they were engaged in. 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. No doubt most of his mourning was brought on by his guilt. And in 2 Samuel chapters 13 through 19, we read about David's son, Absalom. And Absalom's rebellion, he tried to take the kingdom away from David, and almost succeeded. And we get the impression that Absalom was a favored, pampered son. He was kind of what we call a spoiled child. Even in his adulthood, David was overprotective of him. And certainly Absalom was a proud person, and who was very concerned about his beauty, his physical appearance. And he sincerely plotted against his father and literally drove David out of Jerusalem and took over the palace, and then he planned to attack David's divided forces and utterly destroy and wipe out David's army. That's what his plan was. That's what he wanted to do. But instead, David's army won the battle, and Absalom was slain. A death he deserved because of his rebellion against David, the king. But before the battle, David begged his captains, he says, deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. 2 Samuel 18, verse 5. When David received the tragic news that Absalom was dead, he expressed his sorrow with the following words. He said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God that I had died for thee. O Absalom, my son." 2 Samuel 18, verse 33. Would it have been better for the nation of Israel for David to die and Absalom to live? Of course not. David's mourning over Absalom was not natural. David's army was actually ashamed of his victory because it brought such sorrow to their king. In 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 2, and David refused to be comforted, and it took a blunt speech from Joab, one of his captains, to show King David how selfish that he was being. Notice in beginning at verse 5, 2 Samuel 19. And Joab came into the house of the king and said, Thou hast shamed this day the faces of all thy servants, which this day have saved thy life, and the lives of thy sons and of thy daughters, and the lives of thy wives, and the lives of thy concubines, in that thou lovest thine enemies, and hatest thy friends. For thou hast declared this day that thou regardest neither prince nor servants. For this day I perceive that if Absalom had lived, and all we had died this day, then it had pleased thee well. Unnatural mourning. Natural mourning, unnatural mourning. And the third is godly mourning. Godly mourning. Godly mourning is the results of a person having experienced the first beatitude, becoming poor in spirit. The right thing for a person to do when he sees that his own spiritual need is to admit it and then turn to God for what he needs. The person who is sincerely poor in spirit will mourn over his sins, come to God, and be comforted. This is truly the only way to find true comfort. True comfort can only be found in the Lord. A parallel passage to this beatitude is the invitation that Jesus gave in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, which says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Our text says, "Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted." There's no difference between they that mourn of the beatitude and the heavy laden of the invitation. And there is no difference between the comforted of the beatitude and those who are given rest in the invitation. Both passages refer to remission of sins by the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now that is the meaning of the second beatitude, which anticipated the gospel of Christ as the means of comfort for those that were of the sin-laden world by removing the cause of mourning, that is, the sinfulness of the world. Nothing could alleviate that kind of mourning or weaken the potency of the sorrow of sin than the comfort of the gospel of Jesus Christ, upon which rest our hope and the hope of all mankind. Comfort ye my people, saith God, the voice of him that crieth in the wilderness. Prepare ye the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway of our God. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. Isaiah 40, verses 1 through 5, and Matthew chapter 3, verse 3. The second beatitude is related in meaning to these gospel prophecies and their fulfillment, and was preparatory to the day of Pentecost when the first gospel sermon was preached. "Come unto me, all ye that are laboring and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Matthew 11, 28 through 30. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Thank you very much for this evening.